At the end of the day, there are a few basic truths that connect all of us as humans. One thing we all feel is the desire to be accepted and understood for who we are. The goals we aspire to, the fears we have, how we got here, and where we're going. On the other hand, we've all dealt with rejection. Maybe you've had a personality clash with a certain coworker, or a romantic partner just kind of checked out while you were discussing a concern that's been bothering you. Chances are, in most of the scenarios where you've felt misunderstood or even unaccepted, the other person didn't mean to do anything wrong, they just didn't get you. We all have blind spots, and having these places where we fall short doesn't make us bad people. But as you've likely experienced yourself, they can still hurt nonetheless. And wow, have you seen hurt in your career? Working anywhere in child welfare and mental health means pain is a part of your daily experience, and it's a lot to handle. So training like this matters. Training can be about developing yourself professionally or understanding your clients better. Training can also help you shake that nagging feeling that you could have done more for a child. You know that feeling. You see the face of a child you wish you could have helped just a little bit more. Or a lot more. In this field, things can sometimes feel out of our control, and so we're here to give you the tools to care for a population that needs your help and expertise. We're here to help you help more kids. Our goal with this training is not to just fill your brain with information. We're hoping to take you on a journey that feels personal too. It's possible you had to summon the courage to even press the play button, and that's okay. We're glad you're here. In this profession, we're gifted in helping other people through their journey. Each of us has a set of guiding principles to help people examine themselves in a safe way. Let's briefly talk about a few of ours. First and foremost, you're here to expand your knowledge and understanding. Some of the information we share with you may be surprising or even challenging to the landscape of your own knowledge. Lean into your human curiosity and love of people. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You can reach out to us or even find someone in your workplace or community to deepen your understanding. Respect other perspectives. Just like the people who walk in your door every day, the intersections of perspectives you'll hear in this course will be diverse. Embrace the complexity of humanity. When discussing what you learn here with your colleagues, friends, and family, be sure to share the mic. This is one of the most effective ways to keep your assumptions in check and to understand how the issues we'll be discussing affect people individually. You probably know where we're going next. Embrace the uncomfortable. We know everyone shapes their worldview through the stimuli around us. No matter how you were raised or what you've consumed, our profession calls us to reach beyond ourselves. Your career has given you the endurance and the empathy to do hard things. Yes, you may feel the twinges of an expanding worldview. You might even need to hit pause just to regulate your emotions. Stick with us. So, what happens when we examine ourselves? What happens when we realize we can do more? What happens when we change the life of the next kid? Let's find out.
Hello, my name is Noemi Marquez. I'm an LCSW, infant mental health endorsed, and almost done with my PhD in social work. One day while I was doing infant mental health work, I was seeing this 4-year-old who, little did I know, would change my life. They were having a lot of problems at school, using the restroom and with friends and bullying, because apparently there was a lot of bullying going on, especially when they were going to the restroom, when teachers weren't really watching, right, or watching as much. And so I didn't realize it because I didn't know anything really about this. It's not something that you learn at school back when I went to school. But that child was actually transgender, or what I would rather say maybe gender fluid, where they were exploring some other gender than what they were assigned as birth. So to my surprise, as time came on and I got some consultation from the psychologist and stuff like that, we figured this out. And it really took the child ending up in the hospital for a bowel impaction, which can be very serious. because they just didn't want to go to the restroom at school because they were that afraid of being bullied. So then the psychologist from the hospital called me and said, do you think that maybe there's some gender identity disorder with this child? And I said, gender what? They're like, yeah, gender identity disorder. Maybe they're actually a girl that is actually, feels like a boy. I was like, I'm not really sure what that means, but I need to research. So I did a lot of research as much as I could, talked to the mom, worked everything else as a family, and didn't really lead the child in any which way or the other, right? Just kind of made it open that, you can grow up to be, who you are, and you can be who you are. And we just need to figure out who that is, right? And so months later, little did I know what was going on in this child's head during their birthday. They asked their mom, do you want to know what the wish that I made when I blew up my candles? And mom's like, yes, of course, honey. And she said, Mommy, I wish that when I grow up, I can be a boy. So remember, it was like on a Sunday and mom called me crying. And she was like, oh my God, this came out and I can't believe that this was happening. And what do we do? I said, I'm not sure. Let's just talk with the child and see what's going on in their head. Like, what's happening? What's the next step? And so with my partners in my life, since I've got some more training and research by this point, we asked the child, hey, do you want to dress like a boy? What do you mean be a boy, right? What does that mean for you? So they wanted to dress like a boy. They wanted to cut their hair. They wanted to have a boy name. I said, do you have a boy name in mind? Like what? And they're like, yeah, I've always had a boy name. I was like, you do? You had a boy name in mind? For how long? So apparently, this child had these ideas in their head for a really long time. And there's nothing medical, right? They're still young. So we're just like, well, let's cut their hair. It'll grow back. Let's let them change their clothes. And all the anxiety, all the depression, all the medical symptoms caused by the anxiety, all the bathroom issues, I was shocked. It was gone. It just reduced just by letting this child do this simple thing. And that's when I knew that I needed to know more. How could it be that something so easy as let's go buy your clothes in the boys section instead of the girls section, or let's cut your hair off, that's all material stuff. How can that be so easy to resolve anxiety and depression? I was in shock. So I had several other kids like that. They came to me afterwards, and after that experience, in different ages, different families, all with similar but different stories and different ages. And I just wanted to know more, because I don't want to do something wrong. I want to do the right thing for our kids. The kids I see are my kids. They're, our families. We're here to help our community, right? So I needed to know more. And the more I research, the more I realize I can only learn so much without going back to university. So I actually went back to university to get a PhD and made that huge investment and time commitment, because I wanted to study under someone that knew what was going on with this situation and could really teach me and guide me. And then with a .edu email, I had access to all this national and international research, medical research by endocrinologists and surgeons and mental health experts and psychiatrists from all across the world. And I couldn't have enough. So then looking back, I said, well, if this is what's happening, our kids in the community with parents that are loving and accepting and want to come to pay an individual therapist, right? Are willing to do this for their kids. What happens to the kids in foster care? So for all of you here that are listening to this, it's a hard journey, and I may be asking a lot for a job, even though if you're here, it's probably not just a job, right? Child welfare is never just a job. It's time to look at ourselves, and time to look at what's out there, and time to look at our kids and say, what are we missing? Why does this kid keep being Baker acted, 20, 30 times? Why can't this kid ever stay in a placement? What's really going on? And if the answer is gender or orientation as part of the root of the problem, let's not ignore it. Let's come together and do something about it. And this is the first step.
Hannah was always really, really outgoing and, took leadership roles when she could. She graduated valedictorian of her high school. She did sports year-round and won 7 state medals, hundreds of hours of volunteer time. But the shift from sophomore year Hannah to over the summer when she started coming out to us, and then very slowly over time to a few different people, we saw her really build walls around her. She really just separated herself because of negative experiences that she had with adults that she had been close to, with the church that she had been part of, members of her team that she had run with these kids since middle school. How I will summarize all of that is that she has a beautiful tattoo that now covers what was once a really, really bad day. Yeah. The scariest part of all was Hannah's coming out story was what it looked like when she did have adults fully, completely supporting her, and it was still a shit show. So many things that we couldn't control, so many things that we couldn't move out of the way, and it was terrifying, to have that happening to your kid and you can't fix it.
Studies show across the country that 40% of kids in care are likely to be LGBTQ. And then I asked, my dear friends that I've known for 20 years that are case managers, and I'm like, so how many LGBTQ kids you have in your caseload? And they're like, I don't have any of those kids. I don't have maybe one. 40%, and you have one or none? Other research shows that they're just not telling us. We need to know more. So we sought out to ask kids directly, what are you identifying? What was your experience? What was life like? How do we improve it? We also reached out to providers and say, what are you seeing on the ground? What are you seeing when things happen? How are you handling things in child welfare? And what are some of your suggestions, right? For all these folks that have, that participate in child welfare and have, an interest in helping kids like we all do if we're in this field. And unfortunately, something that we found is that no matter how hard we tried to reach out to our youth, right, to our young adults that were LGBTQ, but very specifically trans, I had this, focus on transgender specifically. It was just so traumatizing that very few came forward to speak. Very few came forward to speak. So, luckily we did have several providers that are aware of the issues and were able to speak with us as well to let us know what their experiences was. And also some, gay or LGB kids, right, that had lived through foster care to share that as well. So while my focus was originally just trans kids, there's so much pain around the subject. So we couldn't get enough kids to say. Gender orientation is a very personal thing. And then when we talk about kids in care that have a lot of trauma, sometimes a lot of trauma because of their gender orientation, right? From lack of acceptance, if we just ignore it, right? Or we just don't want to talk about it, and kids know, right? They can tell where we're coming from, right? Then they don't feel safe. If I can't be who I am, I'm not safe. And I'm definitely not safe with you, and I'm not getting what I need. We have to be that voice. And the providers and the other LGBT kids were that voice for all of them. And so there's more work to be done. We need to figure out how to reach those kids that have finished care. What are these kids' experiences? What are they living through? And how we can help them. Not just ones that have already left child welfare, but I would love to hear from kids within child welfare and see if they have any suggestions for us, right? We always want the best for our kids within the system. And a lot of times the best improvements start with when we actually listen to the kids and the families within the system.
Our work with children and families is based on relationships. Through positive relationships, we hope to engage, guide, mentor, and motivate. When we hold on to myths and stereotypes about people, we can't engage in an authentic relationship. Stereotypes limit how we see people and how we view their possibilities. Further, stereotypic views can generally be detected, thus interfering with any potential to build trust. On a much more concrete level, stereotyping can simply lead to you making wrong decisions or taking wrong actions. We all approach our child welfare journey with a big suitcase full of wishes, hopes, values, feelings, fears, past experiences, beliefs, and dreams. The suitcase may be stuffed with all kinds of things, sometimes even conflicting things or ideas or beliefs that are still in process. Just like on any journey, you may find that you brought some things that are no longer helpful or that are even holding you back. It is important in doing an inventory at each step of the way to ensure that you have what you need to get the most out of your journey. I want to challenge you with a few questions that will help you check your inventory of what is in your suitcase, so that you may decide at this point in the journey what to throw out, what to set aside for use somewhere else, what to keep, what to grow, and what may need to be added. This is not about being right or wrong, but rather exploring your beliefs and values. The more honest you are with yourself and your colleagues, the more valuable this will be for you. With each of these questions, take into account how comfortable you are, and let's figure out what you might need to rearrange in your suitcase in order to do the best work that you can do. Consider these scenarios. A 17-year-old youth discloses to you that they're gay. An 11-year-old discloses their sexual identity to you. You discover that your church does not support the LGBTQ community. You've been invited to march in a pride parade. You find out that your child's teacher is openly transgender. You find out that your doctor is openly lesbian. You're working with a boy who is gender variant. Your best friend comes out as non-binary. Your child comes out as bisexual. You need to discuss sexual identity with foster parents. What are you feeling as you imagine these scenarios? Which scenarios caused a twinge of anxiety? Which ones raised questions about the right way to handle that conversation? In this course, you may experience moments where your inventory feels heavy. It's okay to take breaks, to reflect, and to toss things that don't fit anymore. Even if you're realizing it now, what's in your inventory really matters in doing this work. How does your inventory affect your clients? Equipping yourself means that you get to help more kids. So let's talk about how.
Something that we commonly talk about in these kind of systems is trauma-informed care, right? How many of you have heard trauma-informed care? We got some people in here, awesome. For those of you who have not, that's okay. What I want to know from everybody is, what are your thoughts about, okay, what is trauma-informed care? What do you believe it is, and how does that work for the child welfare system or kids in general, right?
Moving through the conversation with the child with genuineness, respect, empathy for where they're at, having an understanding of whatever traumatic event that they went through, and proceeding with the utmost respect and navigating that conversation appropriately.
The trauma that they've experienced affects them in every walk of their life, and not labeling it as acting out or bad behavior or all the other terms that you hear, but saying this is their trauma.
Not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you, right? We're separating the trauma from behaviors, that are maybe undesired or maybe even unsafe, right? Because sometimes that can happen. Really just focusing in on, hey, you as a person versus trauma, right? Like, you are just trauma.
I think it's meeting the child where they are. As a former school teacher and a child welfare, worker, meeting the child where they are means that you're willing to understand, what they went through, whether that is sexual abuse, physical abuse. All of those things are met with some sort of emotion, whether that's anger, whether the child is jumping off their desk, whether they're yelling, cussing, fighting. It's having that willingness and openness to meet them where they are and you build from there without judgment.
Love it, love it.
Perhaps letting that child know that he or she's not alone when it comes to leadership, when it comes to resources to help with this trauma. I think we're in a fantastic opportunity and time now where we can openly discuss that. And I think by letting those children know that they're not alone, even that their friends and colleagues and classmates may have been through the same thing, it may be a little comforting to them.
We're talking about safety, establishing safety in the first place, right? Give the child a space where they feel like they can talk about what's going on, right? So not having judgment, those kinds of things, right? Being trustworthy, being transparent, right? We're creating space for them to feel like, hey, if this person is being honest with me about, what's going on and how this is happening and what I'm experiencing and what I'm about to experience in maybe child welfare systems, then I can trust them back. I can provide something back, right? Peer support. What do we think about peer support in trauma-informed care?
So much of it is hidden and we don't talk about it. So, to have the peer support, family support.
You gotta be more understanding to your child. And like you said, meet them where they need to be met at, but also if they need to be open and they wanna talk to you, listen to them and hear them out. Don't just automatically try to label them and put a label upon them. Listen to them, hear them out, and if they want to seek counsel, let them do counseling sessions. And then even if you want to join the counseling session, if it's okay, so that way they can be open. You know what I'm saying? I love transparency. I always say transparency is key. So I really think that is a good thing to do. So that way that shows them that they have the support that they need. It shows them that this is a safe place and it's a safe person I can talk to. I got my person, my mom, my dad, my sister, my aunt, whoever I need to have. I got them in their safe place. They're not going to judge me. They're not going to criticize me. So.
One of the most beautiful aspects for peer support is that sense of universality. So the idea that we're not alone, that there are other people that understand what we're going through, just being able to feel like the world is not like a closed off space, like I'm the only person experiencing this, right? Especially for our kiddos, it's really, really common at that stage developmentally to feel like everything is happening to me and just me, like I'm all alone in this process.
I think talking to the parents is very important, or the support system, whatever support system.
So you're kind of tapping into one of the next parts of that comes in with trauma-informed care, right? Collaboration, being able to work with other people that can help provide a safe space for this kiddo that we're working with, just at a basic level, just in trauma-informed care, right? Empowerment, give them a voice and a choice. Kiddos are already in a situation where they don't have a lot of power because they're a minor, right? And so if we can give them more opportunities to feel empowered, to be able to talk about their experiences, say what they need, to say what they would like, what they're not comfortable with, being able to empower their voice is incredibly important from a trauma-informed perspective.
Reaching into your inner child and going back to those thoughts of how did you feel at that point, and messaging that to these children and saying, you are doing the best that you can right now. You are showing emotions that are appropriate. Let's talk about that instead of just like what you said. What's wrong with you? What has happened? What can we do to make this better?
Yes. So there's one final component to trauma-informed care, and that's acknowledging culture. That's acknowledging historical impact. That's acknowledging gender issues, acknowledging sexuality, acknowledging all the pieces and parts that make this person, this little person, even if they're like 16, 17, this kid that we have with us, a whole being, right? A whole being. We're not just picking them apart as behaviors, like many of you have already stated, right? Seeing them as a whole person for what they need and what they have gone through.
So, what is the goal of foster care? In 2011, Congress mandated that every state must integrate trauma-informed practices into child welfare to better promote safety, permanency, and social-emotional well-being. That mandate spurred countless trainings over the last decade, many of which you've likely attended. In child welfare, our goal is always to act purposefully, to know and understand the trauma present in the lives of the children we work with every day. It's also knowing that their families have trauma and that our coworkers and colleagues have trauma. something that motivates us to do the most good in this very difficult profession. That's why we're here. We've seen over time how this knowledge and understanding is most impactful to kids when it's integrated from the front desk to the people serving lunch in the cafeteria, to the medical professional, to the mental health professional, to the attorneys, to the judges, to the caseworker, and to the foster worker. In foster care, the shift from simply viewing a child's behavior to understanding that behavior in the context of their trauma has helped us make better placement decisions. We don't see a kid as a bad kid. We see a kid who has trauma and who needs different support. The same goes for LGBTQ kids, who represent a diverse minority group with layers of unique needs and traumas. When we're looking at behavior, it's not just a behavior that's born out of trauma. It's a behavior that's been shaped by trauma and as an attempt to get needs met. Like all children, LGBTQ kids want to feel safe. That aggressive kid or the kid that hoards food is not that way because they're being sneaky or mean or nasty or they're just evil. No, they had to be aggressive because that's how they were able to survive. So we have to ask, what is the need that they are looking to have met? And how is this behavior a strategy born out of trauma? For LGBTQ youth, some difficulties they face include prejudice, rejection, domination across society and family levels, and many providers lack awareness of these issues. As we'll discuss later, this population also struggles with elevated levels of depression, anxiety, homelessness, trafficking, and suicide. Providing affirmative care to this population ensures that we are not rejecting them or scolding them, which can be re-traumatizing. Rejection and shame from professionals like us are similar experiences to the ways that they were traumatized by their families. This counters our goals, our mandates, for providing trauma-informed care. So we can't be trauma-informed unless we're also being affirmative with this population. Because each of us grew up with our own ideas about this population and perhaps weren't exposed to the realities faced by the LGBTQ population, we might not know about the resources that exist. For example, we might unknowingly refer an LGBTQ youth to a provider or foster placement that we assume is good for them, but in actuality, it's harmful to them because of prejudice and other safety issues. If this is the first time you're learning about affirmative practice, that's okay. Our research demonstrated strongly that there's a lack of community and school resources about the LGBTQ population, and that affects our medical, mental health, and child welfare communities as well. In this training, we'll give you the understanding and tools needed to truly deliver trauma-informed care that increases stable placements and permanency while improving outcomes overall for these children.
If we're not having this conversation and they're not having a conversation, what does that mean for them?
It's bad because you hold so much inside till you don't have no one to talk to. You don't have a safe space. You don't have a person that you can talk to and vent to. And it leads to emotional damage, trauma, depression. It leads to so much. And you can even suicide, y'all. And then it's not doing any good when your peers are over here bullying you, and it's bad. It's very bad. So that's why you have to have that open line of communication with your parents, your auntie, your uncle, whomever you decide to trust. And that person has to be supportive. Everyone needs love. All of us sitting in this circle need love, and we need the support from people like you, each of us. We need that. And I'm telling you, When you don't have that, because I'm telling you, the depression, been through it. Locked up in a mental institute, did that. No support from friends and family. Oh, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this, you're never gonna amount to anything. You're this, you're that. That stuff is traumatizing. And did I change because of trauma? No, I changed because of me. I had to reevaluate my life. And so it's been from age 25 to 37. Am I perfect? No. Have I made mistakes? Yes. But one thing about it is the transparency. Transparency is key. And I'm telling you, these kids need someone. They need the support. What y'all doing here is beautiful. They need the support, because I'm telling you, if I didn't have the support from my mom and my family, y'all, I would be dead. But I'm thankful for my mom, because she stood by me. My father, he wasn't with it, but he came up to par, and he stood by me too. So I am forever grateful for things like this, because it's needed in the community.
What's the most important part about trauma-informed care for our kids who are in child welfare systems, right? So if we're using trauma-informed care, what is maybe the baseline that we should have for particularly our LGBTQ youth?
Creating a safe space for them.
Mm-hmm.
Not having expectations for expressions of how they want to express themselves, either gender-wise or anything. It's just them. And it's hard because we all have the societal expectations running around in our heads, whether we want them there or not. And we just have to remind them ourselves that it's okay to be whoever you want to be. Mm-hmm. And whatever it looks like for you.
Yes.
I think a piece that is also kind of like very important to this is understanding the cultural competency. It's different for some of us. In some cultures, you come out and say you're gay, you want to. You say you like girls if you're a girl, or you're a boy and you say that if you want to. You will be shamed. In some cases, you will be beaten. So we have to understand that dynamic, you know what I mean? And what that looks like for some of the kids that, we have to use trauma-informed care with. Me personally, I've seen it where people have come out, this should be liberating to them. And even as children, you're allowed to have that freedom. You're allowed to have that liberation. But we have to understand those, those barriers and those influences and those nuances that will make a child say, I don't feel comfortable doing this. Yeah. That builds that trauma in them, right? Which is where the trauma-informed care kind of comes into play.
It's okay not to come out. Maybe you want to talk to me about it, but I always say it's not my information to share, and I don't ever say, they are or aren't or whatever. Just, like you said, safe space for our kids.
We're all talking about creating affirmative practice. We're all talking about making sure it's an affirmative space for the child in the system, right? We do not want to create a space where they feel like if something goes in a direction that's going to do more trauma and we're already experiencing trauma, that is the last thing we want, right?
Right.
So affirming a child's experience means paying attention to what are all the intersectional influences that are going on here, between culture, between identity, between just, even trauma, what has happened there, right? So affirmative practice is the baseline that we're looking for when we're working with kids in the child welfare system. So when I say affirmative practice, off the bat, if you were to give a definition for it, what is the definition that you would think for affirmative practice?
A conscious practice, a conscious action to take that is thoughtful and executed correctly.
Love it.
Say affirming the child too in whatever identity that they themselves have taken on and express themselves as.
Meeting them where they are too, and just building awareness around that. So you're conscious of your movements, how you speak to them. I think that's really important too.
And if you have their own personal judgments or ideas, you need to leave those back at the door. No matter how or what the child's been through or reactions or whatever, but just to sit and go, oh my gosh, really? You know, I mean, that kind of stuff I don't think is real helpful to anyone.
Coming out can be a journey, not but just a journey of, and respecting that journey and being affirming of, this is, they tell you something, you're like, okay, and then maybe a couple of months later they tell you something else, and you can see, but not pushing, not trying to rush that for them in any way, just being, again, a safe place for them to talk about it, because you may be the only adult that they have a place to talk about it.
That's such a good point about it being a journey, is, I had parents who were divorced and then remarried, so, my coming out was to multiple parents, it wasn't, over the course of a few years, but it wasn't like, we had a family meeting, and I think we see a lot of those non-traditional families that aren't here, and sometimes when you are ready to make that bold decision to come out and speak to a family member, a parent, or a sibling, and if they're not, physically here, or if they're in a different situation, that does add to that journey. And how is this going to come out? Because it's going to be, obviously different for everybody.
The concept of time with the coming out process, time with identity, how that intersects and can change experience over time, right? So when we're talking with a kiddo 1 week, they may have one set of experiences that they're like, this is what I'm experiencing, this is how I identify right now, and guess what? It can change.
Yes.
And that is normal, and that is healthy, and that is okay. And we can continue to do that. We do that as adults. Everybody does it, right? For some reason, we sometimes run into people in workspaces who are like, no, the kid can't change that. Yes, he can. You've changed too. So yes, time is definitely a factor that runs in and out of this too. In the helping fields in general, as well as in any kind of position that intersects with child welfare, this topic, particularly LGBTQ and talking about identity, sexual orientation, gender identity, all of these pieces, for some reason, this is a really difficult topic that doesn't get a lot of airtime. Why do we think that is? And for the start, we'll think about just from a professional perspective. Why do we think it's a little difficult?
It's uncomfortable for people who just aren't aware.
If they don't have that understanding, they might fear it. I think it's easy to fear the unknown. If you haven't done your own research, or if you don't have, a friend, a family member, someone that belongs to this community that's given you that experience, people can be quick to write it off. But that's why visibility is so important. That's why saying, hey, I'm here, and even if you don't feel okay right now, you might one day.
We face, societal issues too that prevent us from talking about it.
We think children don't know themselves, and they do, and we do that with children on so many different levels, but especially something about sexuality. I do think that a lot of people equate it to sex as opposed to who you are in your sexuality, and so that's no, you don't know, and and I've heard people tell kids like, oh no, you're not gay, and that's just so harmful. But just we think kids don't know, or we feel like we're protecting them because the world is not always kind, and so I think it's kind of those parts.
And they're savvy. Kids are savvy individuals. So they're going to get the information from somewhere. So wouldn't we want it to be in that safe space?
Yes.
Right?
Children, like you said, they are very savvy. It's 5-year-olds that can tell you more about sexuality than you can at the age of about 35, 36, 37. I think that by making an attempt to cover it up and hide it, it demonizes it, and it almost comes off as if, okay, if you go over there with them, it's going to come with this, it's going to come with that. When in fact, you can get that in the heterosexual, heteronormative life as well. But since it's LGBT, it's demonized. It's almost weaponized. They'll use your orientation as a weapon.
You have tapped into literally every reason why this becomes very difficult to talk about in professional workspaces, right? We're talking about personal experiences and biases and ideas that can get in the way, taboo, lack of information, just not having the education, right? Politicization also as well. These are all components that are going to get in the way maybe of us being able to have a conversation as professionals in the system. But you also have all demonstrated all the reasons why that's problematic. And we should be having these conversations, right? We definitely should. Because now let's flip it on this head. What about for the kiddos, right? For our kids in the system, if we're not having this conversation and they're not having a conversation, what does that mean for them?
Here are some of the constructs of gender affirmative practice. Gender diversity is not disordered. Being transgender or non-binary is not a mental health or medical issue. It might be different from what we're used to or what we grew up thinking, but different is not bad. Gender expression and norms are diverse across cultures. Think about it. There's tons of diversity between cultures in the different ways we present our gender identity, from the roles we play in society to the way we style our hair and even our clothing. For example, in many parts of the world, such as here in the US, clothing cut in the style of skirts or dresses are considered distinctly feminine. However, such styles of clothing function as masculine wear in other parts of the world. The traditional Scottish kilt might look like a feminine skirt here in America, but in Scotland, it is a distinctly masculine article of clothing. In many parts of the Middle East, men wear a long flowing robe called a thobe. While again, Americans might perceive that design as feminine, in countries like Saudi Arabia or Qatar, it's considered modest and appropriate attire for men. These are just a couple examples of how various forms of gender expression, down to the clothes we wear, differ between various cultures. What may be masculine in one part of the world may be considered feminine in another, and vice versa. Gender is fluid and on a continuum that changes across time. Our gender expression and who we are can change across time and in different situations. Now, on that last point, you may think, well, not for me. I'm cisgender, I've never questioned my gender, so how would my gender expression change? That's true. Many people identify solidly with the gender they were assigned at birth for their entire lives. But even the extent of our outward gender expression can fluctuate day by day. For example, a woman may wear a t-shirt and jeans one day and a fancy dress with high heels the next. Did her gender identity change when she swapped outfits? No. But she did fluctuate between a more traditionally masculine expression and a more traditionally feminine expression. Just as our expressions are more fluid, some people's identities are more fluid too. Related pathology is often more due to societal reactions of gender diversity. Any sort of dysphoria or pathology, depression or anxiety, really is more often due to societal reactions, parental reactions, and community reactions. This last point is a really important phenomenon to note when we're helping LGBTQ individuals struggling with mental health crises. We've talked with many different counselors and consulted sources in developing this curriculum, and we've found that a vast majority of the varieties of mental pathology they saw in transgender patients was largely, if not almost exclusively, caused by external pressures and societal reactions. These societal reactions aren't just external experiences of discrimination and stigma, but also how these experiences are internalized by the person. No child comes out of the womb thinking, I'm different and that's wrong. I'm bad because I'm different. These are ideas and behaviors they learn from society. When they internalize these external notions about themselves, they start to develop symptoms of depression, anxiety, and other disorders. Let's think about how this internalization occurs. Consider this for a moment. This may be tough, but stick with me. Think back to when you were a kid, sitting around with your parents or your grandparents, listening to them talk about grown-up topics. Chances are, when you were really young, you probably didn't understand a lot of what you were hearing. The context and the impact of what they were discussing went over your head. But based on their behavior and tone, you could tell that they regarded the thing that they were discussing as good or bad. In your own household, how many times did you hear somebody say something like, "Oh, that gay person is disgusting," or "What do you mean this guy now wants to be a girl? That's crazy." Maybe some of you were lucky enough to not hear things like this growing up. But chances are, most of us can think back to at least one incident similar to this. When an LGBTQ child starts to have questions about their own gender identity or orientation, the messaging they've internalized kicks in. They might think, "But wait, I think I might be gay," or "I don't feel like I'm the right gender. Then does that mean I'm bad or that I'm crazy?" And that stays with us, right? Because throughout our childhoods, we've heard grown-ups in charge say that stuff is bad and disgusting and crazy. And it's not just stuff from our parents or guardians either. You may have heard your friends telling crass jokes about gay or transgender people at school, or seen bullying happen to other kids that were considered gay or sissy. You might have watched television shows with negative messaging about gay, bi, or trans people. The child who is questioning their orientation or their gender identity has all this messaging coming at them in a chaotic rush and may end up internalizing a lot of these negative feelings. And that is often what leads to the pathology that we often see with young LGBTQ individuals. One exception is the physical gender dysphoria that many gender diverse people have with their own bodies. That is one situation where the cause of distress is more internally based and not so much external, but we'll discuss that more in depth later. Even then, gender dysphoria, which comes from within, can be exacerbated by external stressors, such as misgendering and discriminatory behaviors. Beyond gender dysphoria, though, a lot of the stress and anxiety we see in LGBTQ youth has to do with how they perceive the world's view of them, and how they see themselves as well. It's hard enough to be on my journey as a transgender person or as a gay person, but then to have society not like me, and my parents hate me, and nobody understands. That's the hardest part of all.
When we talk about affirmative care, when we talk about trauma-informed care, one of the things that I'd like to talk about too is that sometimes there can be a misconception that, well, if we do all this affirmation, what if they're doing things that are unsafe or that could hurt them? Absolutely. Now what do we do?
Yeah.
How would you deal with that?
I think that trauma-informed care doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving the child every single thing that they want and that you're letting every single thing, "Oh no, you'll be okay, I'm using trauma-informed care." No, you are still a child. Certain things you cannot do. You're expressing to us that, "Oh, I'm a male and I'm interested in boys." Okay, that's great. I'm glad that you can be yourself and you have that interest. But when you say, "I'm 14 and he's 23," no, it doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? And that same concept goes either way. Trauma-informed care doesn't necessarily mean that we bend the rules. It means that we meet you where you are, but there's still, statutes in place. There's still laws that are in place. Now, we're protecting you and allowing you to have that freedom of expression as long as it doesn't go against the law.
It's against our safety, right?
Exactly.
First part of trauma-informed care is creating safety, and I think
Right.
this is an aspect that sometimes we start to get confused about. It's like, well, if I'm being affirmative, that also means including safety as part of making sure they're okay, right? Their behaviors versus identity, behavior versus identity.
Right.
Is that behavior safe or unsafe? That question never changes, no matter what, right?
Right.
That's part of our job in, interacting with children is helping them create those boundaries and talking about, this is for your safety. No, we would tell any child, no matter what their sexuality, that there are adults out there that want to do harm to children. And, as an adult that cares about you, I can't let that happen. But just helping them create those boundaries and navigating those boundaries and I think is just part of being a good adult helping a child, no matter what.
Good person.
Coming out as an LGBTQ teen is not easy, and it's definitely harder in some parts of the country than others, depending on different, lots of different cultural and socioeconomic factors. Hannah felt close to a certain key number of people that she slowly started letting that out. And, it's high school, so one person is 10 people and all that kind of stuff. But that then became all they saw. She lost friends that she'd had since grade school that just turned their back. She knew that that was going to happen, that certain people were going to respond that way. But the people that she thought she could trust, that she thought it was going to be different, that she opened up to them and she thought they were going to see her the same way that they did before, it wasn't like that. There were experiences where it was like that. Her best friend, thankfully, a really good coach, one or two teachers, the one class that she did keep her senior year, that was a safe place, that classroom. So it wasn't completely exclusionary. She quit hanging out with friends, with one or two exceptions. She quit doing all the things that high school kids do. Hannah became withdrawn. Hannah became excessively moody. Even, she's a teenage girl, so there's some level of that anyway, but it was different. There was a dramatic shift in how Hannah acted, how Hannah presented herself, how Hannah did everything. And that's the shift that we saw. They don't come home and tell you this terrible thing happened. One reason is because she knows that I would have tried to fix whatever terrible thing was happening, and that it would have definitely gone into mama bear mode, and that's not necessarily always helpful in the situation depending on what it is. It wasn't until probably her sophomore year of college that she started telling us the things that happened. All that kind of stuff just kind of weighed in on her, and we worried about her safety within her own self. The pain just becomes so unbearable, so completely unbearable, that they don't know what to do to alleviate some of that pain or to shift for just a minute the focus of that pain. And so we saw that she was closing off. We saw that she was that summer, man, she just worked so many hours. She was working multiple jobs and everything else. And we just thought, it's Hannah. She's a hard worker. She's, saving money for college and all that kind of stuff. But those impacts are life-altering. And that's what it looked like for Hannah when we at home were a safe place. And she did have those adults in her life that she could turn to. And she had that one or two really good friends that did stick by her side through all of this.
Let's talk about fears. Can having these conversations too early actually make a child gay or trans? Or does talking about LGBTQ identities mean we have to have the birds and the bees talk at an earlier age? Will discussing any of this affect how a child develops? These are common worries that keep a lot of parents in particular afraid of bringing up their child's orientation and gender. It feels taboo, and the lack of resources and awareness have historically kept it that way. Let's put ourselves in the mind of a child. Children explore all kinds of new things, and along the way, they communicate what they like and what they don't like. You get to learn all about their favorite foods, their favorite stuffed animals. You get to see them learning how to make friends, their personalities and their preferences begin to take shape. For any parent and child, this is an exciting time of growth and discovery. In fact, identity begins to form as early as 2 years old. At some point, that child is going to come home with a little crush on someone at school. Cute, right? You wouldn't immediately dive into the talk because your child has a crush. You might ask them what they like about their crush, which helps you understand their attraction. Listen to them. Similarly, your child is going to start making choices about how they dress and look. Naturally, you'll guide them in understanding how their new world works. The left shoe goes on the left foot. The tag goes in the back. You only need this much shampoo. This guidance is helpful when we're leaving room for that child to find their own ways of expressing themselves. As a parent, you hope your guidance leads your child to develop a positive sense of self, and that their self-esteem gives them confidence to be who they are. Over time, their preferences form. And for some parents, they find themselves at a crossroads because they want to see themselves in their children. On one side of the road, you have the choice to guide your child away from preferences that feel different from how you were raised. And on the other side, you can allow your child to take the lead in finding out who they are. Let's take a moment to think here. What kinds of things can disrupt the positive integration of self-identity? What can limit someone's ability to feel good about themselves? Most people experience shame at some point in their lives. What comes to mind when you think back to a time when you felt bad about yourself? Perhaps you were trying to learn something new and an adult in your life yelled at you for doing it wrong, or you were picked on at school for the clothes you were wearing, or maybe your parents made you feel bad about getting a bad grade. Maybe a boss undermined you by micromanaging your every move. Maybe you've been outwardly discriminated against. At some point, you were made to feel different, bad even, by others, and this feeling of shame compounds as we learn more about societal norms and expectations. We even start shaming ourselves. Some of these memories may go way far back for you, so let's talk a bit about development. From the time they're born, infants begin receiving information about themselves from the reactions of the people around them. Based on those interactions, they recognize who cares for them and who makes them feel safe and who is a stranger. They make other distinctions too, like how others look and sound. They categorize people. And they learn how they themselves are the same as or different from others. These observations are heightened when kids start school and they encounter more social situations and more types of people. They learn what characteristics about themselves make a difference in the way they're treated by others. This contributes to their self-esteem and sense of identity. Let's look at this process through the lens of gender development. At 6 months old, babies can discriminate male and female faces and voices. At 2 years old, they gain knowledge about gender labels, and before their 3rd birthday, they will likely refer to themselves as a boy or a girl. At 3 to 5 years old, gender guides their own clothing and appearance choices. And by age 6, most kids show a preference for spending playtime with other kids of the same gender, and they may gravitate towards interests that are associated with that gender. For many parents, there's a discomfort in talking about orientation and gender because they think bringing it up will make their child gay or trans. The truth is, you can't make somebody gay, or trans, or any other fluid identity within the LGBTQ continuum. When your child comes home with a crush at school, they either feel that attraction or they don't. Or with gender, they either feel comfortable with their sex assigned at birth or they don't. Those feelings appear naturally. You can't force them. So some parents find themselves dismissing it as a phase. Oh, they'll come around eventually. Nothing to see or do here. If we ignore it, it will just stop. Talking about gender also triggers this internal crisis, right? Because when you grew up, there were boys and there were girls, and that was it. However, now we're starting to see all this diversity that rocks your world a little bit. Finding out that everything you thought you knew about gender as a binary is wrong can be really tough. It's very personal and uncomfortable, but that's okay. Managing your internal crisis about this is important though. If left unchecked, it can produce microaggressions, phobias, and victimization. And that can be harmful to the child involved. Studies repeatedly have shown us that when an adult avoids talking about something, the youth will conclude that, oh, this means you don't want to talk about it because it's bad. Then the kid feels like they want to talk to an adult about something, but it's not okay. And they feel like they don't have anyone to talk to about it, so they don't. Even if you intended to or not, ignoring these conversations can lead to suppression and isolation. And that affects everything in that child's life. In pre-adolescence, the American Psychiatric Association found that gender-diverse children struggle silently with gender dysphoria, the psychological distress from a misalignment between your sex assigned at birth and your gender identity, until they feel safe to disclose it to friends and family. 13 and a half years old is the average age that transgender youth become homeless in New York. With the onset of puberty through adulthood, gender dysphoria deepens, focusing on physical features and body parts. Turner, 2009, found that gender-diverse youth can develop hate and disgust toward their genitalia and extreme desperation as their bodies betray their sense of self. And in a survey of almost 119,000 high school students, 1 in 3 transgender youth reported attempting suicide. Almost 1/3 reported being a victim of sexual violence, and more than half reported a 2-week period of depression. So when is it too early? When is it too early to make a child feel loved and accepted and valued? Age-appropriate conversations can and should start early, and no, that doesn't mean you're giving the sex talk to a preschooler. It means affirming them in who they are. Resources exist to help guide you at any stage of development, to help your child understand themselves and the world around them. As mental health and child welfare professionals, understanding the journey parents and children go through with their identity development helps us better support them and offer affirming resources along the way. Multiple studies have indicated that transgender youth are disproportionately represented in child welfare settings and are often victims of prejudice, discrimination, and mistreatment. Transgender youth enter the child welfare system for some of the same reasons as non-transgender youth: parental abuse and neglect. However, an aspect that is unique to gender-diverse youth entering child welfare settings is that they are often kicked out of their homes by their parents and families after revealing their gender identity. As a result, transgender youth have been identified as an especially vulnerable population in an already high-risk population of youth in child welfare settings. Currently, there are very few explicit protections for transgender youth in child welfare settings. Most of the existing cases on gender identity discrimination concern sexual harassment or employment discrimination of transgender people on the basis of their gender identity. Few cases specifically address the discrimination of transgender youth in child welfare settings. In particular, transgender youth in child welfare settings experience challenges in 3 primary areas: safety, gender expression, and access to gender-affirming medical care. Transgender youth are often placed in housing situations where their gender identity and their gender expression are not respected. Consequently, they're at higher risk for physical, emotional, and sexual harassment as well as bullying. For example, staff may force transgender youth to wear traditionally gender-conforming clothing and to use sex-segregated facilities such as restrooms, living quarters, locker rooms, etc. that do not match their gender identity. Additionally, staff may intentionally not use their transgender clients' preferred pronouns and names. Transgender youth may also be denied medical care such as hormone therapy prescribed by physicians and mental health professionals. Gender-affirming medical care may also be delayed, interrupted, or terminated for these youth. This creates an emotionally and physically unsafe space, which is harmful to their development. Some transgender youth who feel unsafe in care may choose to live on the streets as opposed to in child welfare settings. Living on the street puts transgender youth at risk for becoming involved in sex work, being exposed to HIV, rape, and incarceration. Additionally, living on the streets disposes transgender youth to homelessness, an incomplete education, and employment and housing discrimination. Some transgender youth resort to self-medicating with black market hormone treatments and self-mutilation. This puts their lives at great risk. There are increasing numbers of youth identifying as transgender or as gender nonconforming. While an overrepresentation of transgender youth in child welfare settings has been documented, concrete statistics are unavailable. There are a number of reasons for the lack of statistics representing transgender youth in child welfare settings. Transgender youth are often lumped together in the LGBTQ category in statistical surveys. This makes it difficult to determine how much of the data is representative specifically of transgender youth. Transgender people may not identify themselves as transgender until a later age. There's limited research on the specific experiences of transgender youth in child welfare settings, but their overall vulnerabilities have been documented and include the following. 44% of transgender youth had been denied service due to their gender identity. 77% of transgender youth reported feeling unsafe in public on a regular basis. 42% of transgender youth reported that they had been physically harassed in their school by their peers due to their gender identity. 46% of transgender youth report missing school because of harassment. Among transgender youth who are out in schools, 12% experience sexual assault, 35% experience physical assault, 17% report that they were physically harassed, often or frequently. Bathrooms, locker rooms, and showers are places where transgender youth are particularly vulnerable to assault. Negative outcomes as a result of the prejudice and discrimination transgender youth face on a day-to-day basis include the following: homelessness, suicidality, increased risk of contracting HIV, increased drug, alcohol use, poor academic performance, social isolation, negative impact on mental health and on emotional well-being. So what you might be realizing is that the core principle of helping LGBTQ youth is actually quite simple. Affirm them. Let's look at how impactful this can be. How many young LGBTQ people believe that they can be a happy LGBTQ adult? For those young people growing up in an extremely accepting family environment, 92% of them believe that they can be happy when they grow up. That's almost all of them. For LGBTQ youth in very accepting homes, the number is still very high at 77%. In homes where family acceptance is only a little accepting, the number drops to 59%. And finally, for LGBTQ youth living in homes where their family is not at all accepting, only 35% of them believe they can be a happy LGBTQ adult. That's close to 1 in 3 kids. Think about how that affects their motivations, dreams, and overall well-being. In our next section, we'll examine the building blocks of the LGBTQ identity and how friction from others affects the positive development of that identity.